Will democracy survive the next couple of years?
Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, The Answer Company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center and Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org. Edina Eye Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years now, in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, Edina Eye offers comprehensive services and dedicated specialists committed to excellence, with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
Welcome back to Access to Democracy. Welcome back to Brian Freeman, the world's busiest novelist. Alan Miller with you as usual. And Brian, I don't know how he does it, is taking time out of his writing regime and spends a little time with us. His latest book, which is the second book that he's done in the Robert Ludlum Jason Bourne series, is The Bourne Treachery, which is out now and has gotten some tremendous reviews, some really good reviews. I assume the book is doing very well.
Yeah, it's been great. In fact, we hit the USA Today bestseller list, and we hit the Publishers Weekly bestseller list. I love to see that. So,
I would think so. Now, interestingly enough, having read an early copy of this book, and Sharon has read it also, I actually think that your description has outdone Bourne. We won't tell him, but he's not around to hear it anyway. But I really think that some of the description that you utilized in this book outdoes what he started to do. And it's an amazing story. You bring back Nova from the dead, and then you leave us hanging at the end of the book. And I won't tell readers or viewers how you leave us hanging with that at the end of the book. But and not only that, with Lenin as well. But we won't talk about that either.
That's always the challenge with my books, is managing to talk about them and not give away any spoilers. So
I don't want to, but we will talk about that. Now, you have, in addition, you've also won some awards this year, correct?
Yeah, I was absolutely thrilled that The Deep, Deep Snow was a finalist for the Edgar Award for Best Paperback Original, and it won the Minnesota Book Award, which is the second time in 3 years that I've won the Minnesota Book Award, which is just an amazing honor. I was so thrilled with that. And The Deep, Deep Snow, one of my favorite novels of everything I've done as well. So I was really touched to see that book get such amazing kudos from people.
And when you say one of the favorites of things that I have done, we're talking about not 5 things or 10 things. We're talking about several dozen things.
Yeah, I think it's over 25 at this point, which is it's been a busy 17 years in this business, but a lot of fun as well.
Well, anybody who can write 25 books in 17 years deserves something. Now, you have a bunch of books that are coming out both in 21 and 22. In addition to The Born Treachery, which is just out, and we'll talk about a little bit more, you're working on another Born book, which is coming out next year. Your really successful audiobook, The Ursulina, is coming out in hard copy. And I haven't read it because I don't do audiobooks, but I will certainly when that's available. And what else do you have coming out? Stride?
Yeah, it's definitely been a busy couple of years. Earlier this year, I released a standalone novel called Infinite, which is the most unusual book I've ever written, and it just got a tremendous response from readers. And in fact, I had sort of initially been thinking of that storyline as potentially something I would do as a screenplay, and I decided to do a novel instead. But that sort of visual element of it must carry through because Universal Studios snapped up the film rights almost immediately when the book came out. So they're in the process of
So
working.
you didn't have to worry about doing the screenplay. You just
they've got pros working on that right now, which is wonderful. So
and it's a psychological thriller, very different from other things that you have done that I have read.
it is, yeah. It's a very unusual story, and yet it's also a very simple story because ultimately this is really a quest for redemption by a man named Dylan Moran, who's sort of trying to find out whether there's second chances in life for someone who's made a lot of mistakes.
Or if there is life after life with a second personality,
exactly.
where you undo your mistakes by being that other person.
That's right. That's right. So we've had a wonderful run with Infinite. The Born Treachery is out now, and I've been, I was just overwhelmed with the response from readers to The Born Evolution, which was my first Born book, and I honestly think a lot of readers have even enjoyed Treachery even more than Evolution, which I think is just great. Maybe because now they sort of know my take on Born. I mean, I really sort of rebooted the whole series, and so they're now really coming along for the ride on that, which is terrific.
One might say Born Again.
Born Again, exactly right, exactly right. And then I kind of feel like I'm slacking a bit here because I have no book launches between now and the end of the year. But then I'll make up for that next year. It's going to be a very busy year. The Ursulina, as you mentioned, that is the follow-up novel to The Deep, Deep Snow. It's available from Audible exclusively right now, and I love the narration that January Lavoie does on the Audible version. It's just magnificent. So if you're an audiobook fan, you should certainly be checking out the Ursulina. It'll be out in paperback and ebook February 1st, and then Born is back next summer in The Born Sacrifice. And then 2 more books out next fall. I'll have a new Jonathan Stride novel set in Duluth called The Zero Night. That'll be out in October. And
Jonathan's one of my favorites, Jonathan Stride.
I think you'll love this new Stride book. It's been a couple of years since I've had a Stride novel out. The last one was Funeral for a Friend. So I'm really excited to get Stride back on stage. And then I'm wrapping up a standalone thriller right now called Girl of My Dreams. And that book's going to be out next fall as well. So yeah, 2022 is going to be a busy year.
Now, how do you work on more than one book at one time?
It's taxing. There's no doubt about that. I've the last couple of years I've worked on a couple of books simultaneously because I've had to do 3 books a year for the last couple of years, and that's what I'm doing this year as well. This year I decided to kind of approach it differently and go back to the idea of writing the books successively. So I wrote The Zero Night first. I'm wrapping up Girl of My Dreams right now, and then I will dive into The Born Sacrifice. And I confess I certainly do prefer working on just one book at a time, but it also means the deadline pressure is pretty tight as well. So yeah, it's I could complain about it, but no one would listen because I'm doing what I love to do and what I've wanted to do my whole life. So if there's a lot of it to get done, well, you know what, that's okay.
And doing so incredibly successfully as well.
Thank you.
You're working also with multiple publishers.
Right.
How does that work out?
Well, it's for me, I really like it because what it allows me to do is tell very different stories and work with very different characters. If I were just doing the same kind of story each time, I think it would actually be very, very difficult to write multiple books in a year. I think what gives me kind of that creative energy is the fact that I can, when I put down one project, the next one that I pick up is completely different. Girl of My Dreams is it's written in a female first person. It's a very unusual story, again, sort of like Infinite in that regard. And when I finish that off, then I'll be picking up, Jason Bourne, which is, a very adrenaline focused action thriller. So really, really different kinds of books. And that works out, for me creatively really well. And I felt like, working with different publishers is a real advantage these days, because the publishing business itself is very distributed. It's kind of like the way things are going with TV and movie streaming services. There's so many different streaming services out there. In the same way, there's a lot of different ways that people are consuming books, whether it's hard copy books, ebooks, audiobooks, and there are publishers that sort of focus on different aspects of the market, and there's a lot of loyalty among readers to their particular channels. So, even though most of my books appear in all of the different formats, they're kind of focused on one format at a time, and that allows me to build relationships with several different publishers.
Now, as I recall, you said that you don't work with a lot of notes or structuring your novels out. So does that mean pretty much the file cabinet is in your head?
Well, I used to be a real intense outliner. In the early years, I used to write very, very detailed outlines for my books. And I've gotten away from that in the last several years for a couple of reasons. One, I like to give the manuscript a chance to breathe while I'm working on it. It feels fresher and more spontaneous if I don't try to sort of control where I'm going too far ahead of time. I still do an outline. I still sort of know where I'm going and some of the key benchmarks along the way and where I want to end up, but it's not a real detailed outline of all the aspects of the book and the characters. I kind of let that flow as I'm actually putting the manuscript together. And I think it makes me a little more neurotic, because it means I wake up every morning and I don't necessarily know kind of what I'm going to be writing that day. And yet at the same time, as I say, it makes the whole process feel fresher and more exciting. And I think that carries through to the reader as well.
It's got to be cheaper than therapy, though.
Well, I don't know. I think at the end of the process, you may feel like you need therapy, but that's another story.
I mean, you just put on a different personality every
True.
day.
Yes. I do feel like I'm becoming a little bit of a split personality at this point.
Now, on your website, which is a very interesting website, and if people are not familiar with it, they should go to it. You have a fascinating interview with Tom Colgan of Berkeley, Penguin, Random House. I don't know which one he is with.
Yeah, with Penguin and Putnam, yes.
Talking about you and the writing process, and it's an at-length interview, twice as long as this interview, as a matter of fact. But you find him to be a really good person to bounce things off of.
Yeah, Tom is my Bourne editor, and he's been in the business, the thriller business, for a long time, and he's got a good eye, and he really knows what works, and it's been a really enjoyable process working with him on Bourne for the last few years. And what I really appreciate from him and from the Ludlam estate is they have been very supportive of the whole idea of me rebooting the Bourne series, because when you look at a hero like Jason Bourne, he's been around for more than 40 years at this point. The original Ludlam novel, The Bourne Identity, came out in 1980 when I was all of 17 years old, and his backstory at that point was revolved around Vietnam and Watergate, and you can't really make that work in 2020 and 2021. So my advice to Putnam and to the estate was that we really needed to go back to the essence of the character that Ludlam created in The Bourne Identity, and then reboot Jason Bourne, the character, in this new modern environment with a whole new story and all new characters around him. And they love that idea. They really gave me rein to kind of go where I wanted with that, and I've been thrilled with all the readers who've said that it's kind of like having Ludlum back in their lives again, and that's what I love to hear. I mean, I was a huge
It's
Ludlum
Ludlum
fan
back in
myself.
their lives, but it's also with a touch of modern, really,
Yes,
politics to it.
yeah,
I mean,
absolutely, yeah,
the Kremlin and Putin and Lenin and things like that.
yep, yep, yep.
And
Well, part
I
of it
won't
is.
even talk about which Lenin we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, there's a little twist in there. But part of it is that when I looked back at Ludlum's novels, and obviously I'd read all of them when I was growing up, so much of the milieu in which he wrote was based on the political dynamic of the 1970s, and you had a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of distrust in government, and you look around in the current decade and you think, well, there's actually a fair number of parallels in terms of where the country is, and so it really felt pretty natural to be able to drop Jason Bourne now down into this new era, because I think there are a lot of echoes of where we were back in the 1970s in what's going on today.
Now, Jason Bourne was out of Treadstone. Treadstone was trying to kill Jason Bourne. All of a sudden, Jason Bourne is back with Treadstone, although as we leave him at the end of the Bourne treachery, we don't know if he's back with Treadstone or not, which is, of course, a hook for the next Jason Bourne. That
Well,
has to be one of the things that evolves.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think a big part of Bourne's sort of ethos as a hero is that he feels correctly that he's been manipulated by by his employers and the government agencies behind him, and he does not really trust what people are telling him. And I think that's a theme that ripples through all of the different iterations of Bourne, and I kind of wanted to play that up. And so yeah, I think anytime, I don't think you can ever really have Bourne without the ghost of Treadstone following him, and yet at the same time, Bourne is never going to really trust what he's being told, and in the Bourne treachery, with very good reason. So.
Well, we learn from the Bourne books that you can't trust anyone. Now, Bourne has been around for 40 years. James Bond has been around longer than that. The question is Bourne eligible for Social Security yet?
Yeah, well, it's also interesting. You've got so many JBs in the hero world. You've got James Bond, Jason Bourne, Jack Bauer. I mean, interesting that these are the initials of the iconic heroes of the last few decades. But yeah, that's the thing. I wanted to give Bourne a new lease on life, and so suddenly he's back in his mid-30s again in the Bourne Evolution, and it gives the chance for him to sort of begin to start over as a hero, and in the same way that we've had a lot of different iterations of James Bond over the years. Obviously, we've got the same thing going on with Jason Bourne, and I feel that my job is to keep that fresh and to reboot this character in a way that he feels very electric and alive to readers, like they can kind of start over again getting to know this character.
Now, one of the things that Brian Freeman, the novelist, said or says is that you have to grab the reader by the throat in chapter 1. What does he mean by that?
Well, I think that readers sort of have a short attention span these days. I think particularly when you're looking at a world of cell phones and little snippets coming up on your computer, people aren't going to give you 50, 60, 70 pages to start getting the action going. You really need to sort of grab them on that first page and pull them right into the plot. And then as the story goes on, you can start to layer all those other dimensions of the characters and the stories in around them. But you need to have them read that first page and feel like, okay, I'm hooked. I can't stop. I can't put this book down.
Getting the hook in is what you're saying. In other words, if you were writing a novel about the kidnapping of a Supreme Court justice, and I won't tell you whose draft that might be, but you might have him kidnapped in the very first chapter, even though that might be a MacGuffin in terms of the book itself.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, that's the thing. It's that first page that kind of sets the tone for the reader. And I know for myself, when I used to go into bookstores and look for books, that's what I would do. I'd read the back cover and then I'd read the first page. And if that first page grabbed me, well, I took it with me to the register. And if not, it was back on the shelf.
As long as you didn't put it in your pocket and then walk out. Now, another thing that the novelist Brian Freeman said or says is that villains are a lot of fun. Why is that?
I really enjoy writing villains, and particularly in the Bourne series. I probably go a little more to the extreme with my villains even than Ludlum did. I like to be able to create villains that are kind of out there, and I think you need that in a series like Bourne, because Bourne is a very self-contained, intense hero, very talented. You need a hero that's going to be, or a villain that's going to be able to stand up to Bourne, because if Bourne is able to sort of just defeat everyone that he comes up against, well, that just doesn't make for a particularly exciting story. So you need a villain who has the same degree of charm and charisma that someone like Bourne does. And so in creating, in the last book, The Bourne Evolution, it was this wonderful Miss Shirley was the villain. And in this book, it's an assassin who goes by the nickname Lenin, and I'll let readers guess as to how that's actually spelled. But one of my favorite scenes in the Bourne treachery is when Bourne is overnight standing by the Thames in London, and he's exhausted, and Lenin is on the other side of the river, and he calls Bourne and says, you should get some rest, Jason. You look tired. And that's an echo from a line that actually comes up in the Bourne movies, where Bourne is telling Pamela Landy of the CIA that. And I just love the idea of turning that back on Bourne in my book.
And
it
he also
emphasizes that this is an assassin that can stand up to Bourne.
He also says that I know things about your background that you don't know, and Jason Bourne doesn't know about his background. So are we ever going to see Jason Bourne sitting in a rocking chair on a porch where he knows his background?
Well, let's put it this way. I think as the series rolls on, you'll probably learn more about Bourne's past, but I won't go much farther than that. But yeah, there's certainly, that's one of the fun things about dealing with a hero who does not remember his past. It doesn't mean that nobody else remembers his past, and it certainly gives him things that can sort of come back and haunt him in a way that he's not necessarily expecting. So there's a lot of that I can work with as we go forward.
Or trigger really reactions from him
Right.
that he can't explain. Yeah, your villains have really very few redeeming social characteristics. Let's put it that way.
That is very true. Yes, that is very true.
Now, you travel in locations all over the world, but in particular Europe. How do you accurately portray those locations where you haven't been? And I assume that many of them you have been. I mean, you talk about Tallinn, and Sharon and I have been there.
Yep.
And could relate to that right away. But how do you do that?
Yeah, I do tend to use locations that I've at least visited in the past. It doesn't mean that I'm going to know all the details that will necessarily show up in the book, but if I've at least been to a place, I have a feel for it and what it's like, and I can bring that into the book. It's clearly been pretty difficult for the last couple of years. Because of the pandemic, it's not like I can be dashing all over the world checking out settings in person again. So I've tended to use locations that I'm familiar with, and then I sort of know how to begin the research process, because at least I'm sort of familiar with how the place looks and feels and what it sounds like and feels like to be there. So that's kind of where I start from, because I want to give readers that you are there feel in the book, that they've been dropped down into every scene and they can hear it and touch it and taste it and smell it and feel it happening all around them.
Or you have a shelf full of photos, travel guides.
There we go.
Now, question. You seem to know so much. about so many things, including current events. How is that possible?
Well, research is fun in these Bourne books, and part of it is to make the reader have it feel like it echoes things that they're remembering. So, for example, a lot of my inspiration actually comes from the fact that most of what I read these days is nonfiction. I read a lot of history, biographies, memoirs. I actually read a book by Ben McIntyre called "The Spy and the Traitor," which was about a Russian mole or a Russian spy who had been the head of the KGB unit in London.
I just read that based on your conversation with Tom
with Tom
Colgan. I
Colgan.
just
Yeah,
read that
exactly.
book, and it's a fascinating book.
It is, and
could be
I was
fiction.
And that really inspired the character of Grigory Kotov in my book. And the point of that is that I want, even though I'm fictionalizing things, I want there to sort of have that echo of reality. And readers read this and they think, yeah, they can't necessarily put it together with what the real event may have been, but it has that era of authenticity about it.
One of the things that really intrigues me about your writing is that you can be in a gory scene and incorporate right into it something that's really soft and passionate. For instance, I'm looking at in the Born Treachery, and we have a fellow who's just been garroted by Bourne, and then his hands worked independently, like a pianist at a keyboard. Now, how do you come up with an analogy like that?
Yeah, I'm always looking for the description that will make it vivid in the reader's mind. Where does it come from? I can't tell you, and I don't like to necessarily ask all that much because I don't know where the inspiration comes from, and I'm just happy it does, but I feel like if I push too hard to figure out why and where, maybe it'll go away. So I like to just feel like, okay, there's a hand guiding mine, and as long as that hand stays there, I'm okay.
How do you draw the line between descriptive language, and we only have a minute left, descriptive language and your factual material?
Yeah, you really have to edit down carefully to make sure that you're not slowing down the plot with your research, and so I tend to edit sort of obsessively over and over to get just that right pace where you've got enough detail to have the reader understand what's going on, and yet you're not slowing them down. You're keeping them turning the pages to find out what happens next.
Some writing instructors say you should always, with dialogue, say he said, she said, which I have a tendency to do. But you sort of wander afield from that by putting in emotions as well as the dialogue. What's the background on that?
Well, yeah, and partly it's also a question of using the additional words to pace the dialogue. If the dialogue's clipping along rapidly and you want it to clip along rapidly for the reader, you don't necessarily need a lot of tags. But then sometimes I want to slow down the scene, and so I'm gonna slow down the dialogue because I want the reader to absorb what the person is saying.
At this point, we have to slow down the interview. We've been talking again with Brian Freeman. Always a pleasure, the busiest novelist in the world. And we hope he'll be back soon to talk about his next several books, which keep coming out periodically. They change like the seasons. Brian, thanks so much.
Thank you.